Hello everyone, welcome back to the TJOmega channel for day 1355 of our daily content grind. So, if you saw the Q&A at the first of the month, the question that I decided was going to be, the title was, Unicron's version of the 13. And even though we didn't really come up with that much in that video, it was a very interesting question. On the spot, it's hard to think of an entire roster for his 13 primes, but it does kind of work to have a dark equivalent of the 13 that serve Unicron. We can work with that. We can absolutely work with that. So we're going to do that today. Now, I needed a basis, right? I can't do this the way that the 13 are done, where they represent individual facets of the Transformers species. We have one prime for the girls, one prime for the multi-changers. We have one prime for the little guys. I can't really do that with Unicron, because that's not Unicron's style. Unicron doesn't usually create Transformers. He usually converts and corrupts them. So these are going to be Transformers after the fact who make sense for Unicron's 13. And to give you some kind of basis, I decided to go off of a list of 13 evils that represent most facets of villainy in the Transformers universe, or just Decepticons in general. And you will notice a little bit of inspiration here that I've taken. So, here's the list that I'm going off of. So we have 4 taken from the 7 deadly sins, being pride, greed, lust, and wrath. We have 4 coming from the 9 layers of Dante's Inferno: Heresy, Treachery, Limbo, and Violence. And then we have 5 that I have added for myself. We have Destruction, Domination, Conquest, Fear, and Chaos. I felt like this was a nice mix of things. And I know, seeing this list, you're already thinking up names. Please, by all means, try to guess, because some of these I have some interesting ideas for. So Pride, for instance, is going to Nova Prime. Remember, the whole basis of Nova Prime is that he believes the Cybertronian race is the greatest in the universe. This is a genocidal force because he believes his race is the best. We could draw parallels. Let's not draw parallels today. But we know where the parallels come from, and yeah, that's pride. That is an overwhelming amount of pride in oneself and in one's, Point being, I believe Nova is about the best we are going to get. Pride is not something that's often seen in big threat Decepticons and villains and Transformers. And I didn't want to go to every big hitter Transformer, but I wanted to hit a few that felt correct. I wanted to just have a few, a few heavy hitters, a few outliers from other universes, not all G1 here, but mix it up a little bit, right? So, for instance, next up on the list is Greed. Now, you would think Swindle, but I think Swindle is a little bit of a light hitter in this kind of thing. I need there to be at least some credibility behind everyone that Unicron has selected. So, for Greed, gone Double Dealer. Because, yeah, Swindle is greedy for himself, and so is Double Dealer. But Double Dealer is the type of greedy that also really doesn't care who survives the result of his greed. When he is arms dealing or when he is playing the mercenary, he doesn't care about the collateral damage. He doesn't care about who gets hurt in the process. Doesn't care who wins the fight. All he cares about is getting that payday, regardless of who is paying him off. Swindle is at least greedy for the Decepticon's sake as well as his own. This guy is in it only for himself. He'll serve whatever commander as long as he gets paid. And whatever war happens in the wake of it, it's not his problem. That's worst kind of greed. That's a Unicron level greed right there. Lust is one you don't normally hear about in Transformers, but I hate to go cliche with this, but I needed a girl on the list because there's a little bit of this where I am trying to match the 13 primes, and I need a match for Solus. I need someone else on the opposite side to kind of mirror them better. And for this, I think the only one... Now, Black Arachnia can be close. She uses her feminine wiles a lot. But I need someone a little bit more pure of that. And that's Arachnid. I think she's perfect for a Herald of Unicron. I mean, you know, okay, so where Black Arachnia is going femme fatale and manipulation, we actually do see aspects of lust in the character of Arachnid, especially if you watch the Japanese version, and that's super creepy. And not in the good, like, horror movie way, just in, like, call the police way. This is about as close as we get to some type of character that would represent lust, and I do think it's a good match. I do think it's a good opposite of Solus. And yeah, and I think when she goes full vampire at the end of the series, I think that gets pushed just a little bit further as well. I think that makes her like a lock for this one. Wrath could be a lot of different Decepticons. You know, there's a lot of Decepticons that are marked by their anger as a characteristic. Movie Bone Crusher came to mind. But again, I want someone who's a little bit of a heavy hitter, not like at the top of the food chain, but somewhere in a convincing point. And I wanted a curveball. I'm making it Grimlock. Grimlock is a character who can get lost to his rage, especially in some universes where his rage is literally part of his personality, like almost like a Hulk level switch. And yeah, he is a character who kind of rides the line between Autobot and Decepticon depending on the fiction. So it doesn't take much. It wouldn't take much for Unicron to taint Grimlock enough for him to go completely onto the side of the Chaos Bringer. Remember, it's not just bad guys. He can corrupt as well. This is a point where Unicron would absolutely do the corruption needed. The fact that Grimlock could already be swayed to just be very self-serving, that just kind of plays into it a little bit of it. That just makes it easier, if anything. So yeah, that's my one little curveball in here. Heresy's an interesting one. You know, what Transformer throughout this fiction, anything in the 40 years, can you define by, his, basically flying in the face of Primus? And now the easy one would be the Fallen. And because the Fallen has been associated with Unicron before, that could potentially work. However, I wanted something a little bit further from that. I didn't want it to be one of the 13, because they are part of divinity themselves. And while he is viewed as like Transformer Satan, I didn't want to include the Fallen. I wanted him to stay his own thing. No, for Heresy, I've gone with Shockwave, specifically the IDW version. This guy... This is like Hater of the Year award winner Shockwave for creating an entire religion just to dupe the entire population of the Transformers species for literally millions of years. For one grand plan. That is a long waiting game. That is a lot of heresy. That is a lot of heresy. So yeah, I'm going with Shockwave on this one. Yeah, like, it could be the Fallen, but I thought that was too easy. I wanted a more interesting choice, so there's your Shockwave. Treachery is another one where you think there's an easy option, and there is. No, I'm not going with Starscream. No, we're going to throw in one of his known heralds, and that's going to be Sideways. It's not enough to just want to take over after your leader. This is, again, someone who is willing to sow treachery amongst both ranks, and if he can divide them up while he's doing that, either to put them against each other harder or to sow dissension within their own ranks themselves, that's Sideways' whole thing. And that strikes me a little bit more interesting, a little bit more treacherous than Starscream's usual shtick of, I want to be in charge. I want power and authority. Let's be honest, I could throw him in for envy as well. If I wanted envy from the 7 deadly sins in here, that could also be Starscream. Didn't feel it this time. Didn't think that was the right choice here. So yeah, we're going sideways for Treachery. Gotta throw in a few of Unicron's usuals. And speaking of Limbo, this one is weird because Limbo as a layer of hell is the topmost layer where you did some bad, but you're not entirely a bad person, right? So like you're in Limbo if like, oh, we're not sure what to do with you yet. So I kind of played around with that concept, and trying to think of like, okay, like that in between the good and the evil, and what would represent that. And I hit on Nemesis Prime, again, a known herald of Unicron in some universes, and or just a creation of Unicron. Yeah, we're basically taking this from the Netflix version, where it is an Optimus Prime from a universe that lost the war with Unicron and just fell to corruption. That rides the line for Limbo for me. I think that works. Don't really have to explain that one a lot. Just, yeah. As a concept, yeah, I think that's an interesting way of looking at it. What about violence? Violence and destruction here could absolutely be the same. I will admit my choices for these two could be interchanged. It just depends on how you classify the two. And yes, there is a difference between violence and destruction. One can much more easily destroy in huge amounts without murder, without any kind of death or bloodshed. And those who are good at destruction may not necessarily like actual violence toward other living things. Meanwhile, someone who's really, really good at violence might not necessarily be good at flat out destroying things. Like there's, there are different levels, there's different mentalities, and that's kind of what I was going for here. For violence, I've gone with Thunderwing. Whether that is the Marvel version, which ripped through a lot of Transformers after he claimed the Matrix for himself, and then became corrupted by it, and then started slaughtering more. Or, if you take the Stormbringer version, where he is just a juggernaut of death. Either way, I think he fits the bill pretty well. And again, I wanted another one of those characters that's underused. Kind of a heavy hitter if you write him correctly, but kind of not. So that's kind of where Thunderwing falls for me. On the destruction side of things, I wanted a combiner in here. This is my opposition to like Nexus Prime, right? So I need a combiner character in here. I've opted for Monstructor. This one is again a little bit more self-evident, especially if I'm going with this version. This one absolutely looks horrifying. But yeah, combiner, I would say way better at the destruction side of things. Oh yeah, these guys can be very violent, but just the size and sheer strength of a combiner, if I'm talking just mass destruction on huge levels, that is absolutely what I am talking about. That's what I'm looking for. Just something that can smash literally anything, and not only enjoys it, but has no care about what happens to anything or anyone around it. Also, he just looks the part. Doesn't Monstructor, doesn't that team actually just kind of feel like they would be something Unicron cooked up? Like it feels right to me. It just absolutely feels right to me. Now, Domination. A lot of Decepticons instill enough fear and control in their ranks to actually make this a thing. A lot of them could be like a representative of Domination. So who am I actually going to go with here? There's a plethora of choices, but let's be a little bit weird. I need an opposition to Micronus. I'm choosing Lord Zarak, specifically the cartoon one. Obviously, Scorponok, most in the comic books, usually seen without his Nebulon partner. Usually he's just a big robot that turns into a big scorpion. In this case, I want Lord Zarak specifically because remember his position in the story before he became the headmaster of Scorponok. He was a warlord. Like, he enslaved the entire planet of Nebulos. He led over an entire team of other warlords. They were the Hive. And if the Hive's technology had actually worked on the Transformers that landed on Nebulos, he would have dominated them as well. And, then you wouldn't even had any story in Season 4. Point being, I feel like that is a bigger level and more dangerous level of domination than rather just your standard Decepticon. He's willing to go through a lot of lengths. He's willing to enslave entire planets just, for his own needs, his own desires. Yeah, that works. That works. It's different than Conquest, though. Domination is the ability to just command and just keep people under your foot. With Conquest, it's being able to make entire planets submit. It's being able to take control of whatever you want and claim ownership over any planet that you happen to come across. In Transformers, that's Deathsaurus. In IDW, a character who became so tired of the way Megatron led things, he just swipes his own war world and just starts flying around and taking things over. Again, I feel like these two are flippable. You could consider these similar concepts, and that's perfectly okay. I think it's a little bit different. I think the two are a little bit different, and I can separate them in my brain of how this would work. For Domination, I almost, again, if I was going with smaller Decepticons, I would pick Bombshell, because that's his whole thing. But in this case, again, I wanted heavier hitters. I wanted something that seemed like this is a really powerful team for Unicron to control. How about Fear? I feel like Sunder was the easy choice here. I have made more than one video describing him as like literally the scariest Transformer character. But as a force of fear, I don't think you get bigger than Tarn. This is a guy who knows that he controls and intimidates other Decepticons through fear. The DJD's whole thing. How violent they are, how merciless they are, that instills fear. And that's the whole point. To be so afraid of the DJD that you do not cross Megatron and end up on their list. That's the whole point. And Tarn is the one who keeps all of that in line, and he's the one who controls all of the fear generated by everyone else in his group. Not enough that Tarn himself is terrifying, but it's the fact that he commands arguably scarier troops, and they all follow his lead. That is more terrifying. It's not just the fear he can instill, it's the fear at his control. That is Tarn. That is fear. That is ripe for Unicron. And that just leaves us with the 13th. And of course, it's the 13th. It's got to be a little bit weird and special. This one, I am going with the obvious one. Because if we're going to come up with a list like this, Galvatron's got to be on it. And I don't think there's any force of chaos that would better suit this one. Because that's his whole thing. You don't know what he's going to do next. He could execute a plan to take over Cybertron. He could just spend the afternoon fusion cannon shooting everyone in sight, including his own men. You don't know. He is just pure chaos in a robotic shell. Madness, insanity. That's Galvatron, and that's where he sits in the 13. As the 13th not being the last of the Primes, but the first of Unicron's followers. Or in this case, heralds, I guess. And that would be my 13. Obviously, extremely divisive, extremely objective. This is just going to be subjective to everybody. Everyone's going to have their own idea. If you want to use lesser Decepticons and elevate them as part of this group, absolutely, that's also a completely valid idea. Swindle and Bombshell would absolutely have a good time on this list if they were in this spot. But if I want an intimidating force, like a 13 villains in the Transformers universe, I think Unicron would be interested in. Because remember, he dealt with Megatron directly. He's not interested in small fries usually. This I think is a solid list. And probably one of the more terrifying teams of Decepticons I've ever seen. And then a few outliers too. So, let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know if you had another idea for what you would have done. And as always, I will see you next time. Hello everyone, I am Astral Agent Magnetar, a Tokusatsu VTuber, and I am streaming 4 times a week over on Twitch, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday afternoons, and a special late night one on late Friday/early Saturday. So come watch, come hang out, and let's make an impact together.